As she was staring at the light, she suddenly fell into a sort of trance, like the lights were hypnotizing her. And she would kind of bring herself out of it, and then she would fall back into this trance like state. She almost described it as like a bliss state. And she would fall into it, and then she would pull herself back out. And then eventually she had this idea that she needed to get closer to this craft, and she couldn't really explain why. In 1978, J. Allen Hynek released a letter that he had received from a woman named Sharleen Nicholson, in which she detailed a very strange experience she had while living in Las Vegas in 1964. She opened her letter by noting that what sparked her desire to speak about the event was a line she heard spoken by a guest on the Phil Donahue show. That's why they land in the desert. The episode was about UFOs. She had had her own encounter and felt it was important to send her report to someone in an official capacity. So she sought out Hynek, who had become a prominent name in UFO circles due to his involvement with Project Blue Book. Dear Sir, she opened her letter. I caught the tail end of the Phil Donahue show in time for someone to say, that's why they land in the desert. I know they land in the desert because I saw one, and the whole experience has left me very frustrated. It was July 1964. Sharleen was in the 7th month of her pregnancy. She and her husband were in bed in their Las Vegas home. She had been having trouble sleeping, tossing and turning since crawling into bed. She just could not get comfortable. She suddenly recalled that she had not taken her water pill and slowly got up and went to the kitchen. They lived in a small duplex on the outskirts of Las Vegas. Across the street was a vacant lot. While there was houses around them, they lived in a fairly isolated spot. I remember thinking there must be a full moon because a lot of light seemed to shine in the small window above the kitchen sink. I took my pill and was about to turn when the room started shaking. I grabbed onto the counter for support. In just a few seconds, the shaking was over. She immediately assumed it was a small quake. While growing up in California, she had experienced them on occasion. She was somewhat excited and had planned to tease her husband about it in the morning, as he slept through it. I started for bed when I noticed this noise like the humming of telephone wires. We had some in the backyard, only more intense. I thought the quake had done something to our wiring. I checked the refrigerator, the oven, even the toaster. Finally, after listening for a while, I decided the sound was coming from outside. Little did Sharleen realize what was awaiting her just beyond her front door. When I opened the front door facing the vacant lot, I was blinded with light. I kept listening and trying to imagine what was going on. My first thought was a car accident had occurred on the dead-end street above us. The light had to be from a police car or an ambulance, but there were no sounds to match. I was confused and eager to see. Sharleen had covered her eyes with her hands to protect them from the light, though she kept trying to peek through to see what was going on. At some point, her vision adjusted enough that she could make out the source of the light. She admits that she got a, quote, awful shock, as sitting there in the lot across the street was an object. To her, it looked like a flying saucer, the type of which she had seen in movies and in books. Even as I write this, I shudder because this shock was the most frightening feeling I had ever experienced. If it were a nightmare, I would have awoken at this moment. I thought flying saucers were a joke. I didn't believe in their existence. My mind went blank. I could neither speak nor move or even think. Sharleen likened it to having her mind wiped clean of thought. I was once again an infant trying to match a name with an object, yet even more helpless because the thought evaded me. I was terrified. I stood there frozen still yet sweating, as I fought to gain control. At last words came to me, first from deep within my head, then faster and faster, till I spoke out loud, the same words, flying saucer, over and over again. I guess I was trying to convince myself I actually saw it. Sharleen claims that the object she saw was not particularly large, about the size of a house. It appeared to glow, but the glow was coming from inside. Red, white, and green lights encircled it near the top and flashed on and off in a rhythm. To her, the rhythm was like flash, flash, pause, flash, flash, pause. They were never all on or all off at the same time. They were the single most significant thing about the saucer. It wasn't made of metal as we know it. I had expected metal, but instead it seemed to be made of plastic. Sharleen wasn't sure how long she stood there looking at the object, but she eventually stepped inside and closed the front door. She shook her head to clear her mind. She hoped that when she looked back out, that it wouldn't be there. It was still there, she recalled, though something was different this time. This time I had more control. I looked to see if anyone else was watching. All the houses around had their blinds drawn and no one was out. Given that it was the middle of the night, it made sense that nobody would be awake. Sharleen then focused on the craft. I looked for doors, windows, or some kind of opening on the saucer and saw none. As Sharleen examined the craft and the movement of the lights, she began to feel strange. She noted that she started to drift into a kind of, quote, lethargic peacefulness. The fear and excitement she had felt when she opened the door was suddenly gone, replaced with a weird serenity. In that moment, time itself felt elusive. I watched and drifted and brought myself back, and drifted again. Suddenly, I was startled to find myself leaning contentedly against the doorframe. I forced myself to stand erect. I realized the light had a soothing effect on me, and I wanted control of myself. Yet even as I realized something was wrong, I lost the battle. Time evaded me in little spurts. Sharleen, for reasons she could not understand, decided that she was going to walk up to the craft. I walked to the end of the fence and started toward the saucer. I hadn't gone far when I became frightened. I was afraid something was going to open up, so I went back to my door. For Sharleen, everything after this moment gets hazy. I remember bits and pieces. I think I watched the saucer a while longer than simply went to bed. I remember trying to shake my husband awake and failing. I distinctly remember our princess telephone, luminous dial glowing in the dark beside the door, but I didn't use it. For those not in the know, the princess telephone was introduced by Bell in 1959. It was a compact telephone designed for use in the bedroom. It specifically contained a light-up dial for use at night or in the dark, so when you would spin the dial to make the call, the dial would light up, making it easier for you to dial the number. Sharleen recalled that the dial light was on as if she were making a call or had made a call, yet she did not remember calling anyone. She found this a little odd. But I did like how she described, the experience, how she was watching the lights and suddenly she was, kind of hypnotized by them. And she knew she was being hit. She was aware of the fact that something weird was going on, that she was in a trance, being placed in a trance-like state. She kept trying to pull herself back from it and then falling back in again. And I just thought that was interesting. You don't usually hear people who have encounters talking about that, but she seemed to be aware of it in the moment. And she was actively trying to stop herself. But she was also behaving in ways that she knew herself. She couldn't really explain it. At breakfast the next morning, Sharleen told her husband about some lights she had seen. But in the years since, he no longer remembers that conversation. Curiously, Sharleen herself did not recall seeing the saucer until a few months later. What triggered her memory, she admits, was something strange. My husband and I and another couple were on my way to my surprise baby shower. The baby had been born healthy and happy, and I knew nothing of the saucer. My friend was talking about a book she was reading. It was about flying saucers, she said. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I launched into my story. My husband looked stricken, but at the time, I couldn't understand his surprise. I spoke as if he knew about it, and I was so wrapped up in my discovery that I could think of nothing else. Later, Sharleen attempted to piece together the events of that night. I was positive about what I'd seen and still am, although the image of the saucer has faded with time. My deep feelings have not. The saucer had two effects on me, although I had not yet remembered seeing it. I slept an unusual amount and avoided walking through the vacant lot. Everyone had a theory about my saucer. It was a dream. It was usual for me to sleep near the end of my pregnancy. I was adamant about the saucer. I had seen it, and it was like no other dream I had ever had. We moved. I had another child. Time passed, and still the questions haunt me. Why did I go back to bed? Why didn't I awake my husband or use the phone? Why didn't I remember the saucer after seeing it? Sharleen eventually wrote to an agency that collected UFO reports. They sent her a letter telling her that they were interested in her story and they wanted her to fill out a report. I started to fill it out, but my story didn't fit their questions. Their form was primarily for people who made sightings in the air. I never finished it or mailed it back. I had times when I dwelled on the saucer. They would last for a few days, and I could do nothing but sit and think about it and feel scared and helpless. I began to read about them. Around that time, Sharleen either read or watched on TV a story about the Betty and Barney Hill case. It put a thought in her head. Could a hypnotist help her recall what happened that night back in July 1964? I wanted to relive the experience and prove that it happened and wasn't a dream. And because of the Hill case, I wanted to know if there was more of it than I actually remembered. Sharleen eventually reached out to one Dr. Johnson, but from the very first meeting she knew he was going to be an issue. He was sure I had a problem before I walked into his office, perhaps something buried deep in my subconscious. I told him I would accept a dream if he would prove it to me. He barely listened to my story, and I cried at the first session while under hypnosis. He said this was proof of my problem. At the second session, Dr. Johnson asked permission for his young colleague to sit in because my case was interesting. I was supposed to imagine myself walking down a long corridor. At the end of the corridor was a door with my name on it. When I opened the door, I would see my problem. I concentrated, saw the door, and hesitated. A hand came out from the side and erased my name from the door. I laughed. Dr. Johnson tried to contain his anger, and the session ended. He said I had a mental block against remembering. I balked at a third session, but Dr. Johnson convinced me to try, saying he would do it at no charge. He wanted to perhaps put me into a deeper trance, perhaps regress me. His colleague sat in. We had barely started the third session when his colleague asked me if it would be all right to use a new spray to help me go into a deeper trance. It sounded odd, but I agreed. Anything to get it over with. He compared it with ether, something to draw me into a deeper trance. Dr. Johnson looked peeved. The two of them conferred privately, and by the time they came back in, I knew the spray was a hoax. The last session was embarrassing. He knew, I knew, but no one admitted to anything. I couldn't go into a trance because I felt like laughing. I don't like being manipulated and being made to feel like a naive child. So here I am with the same crazy story that sounds like a bad dream and no proof. Sharleen's family doctor, who delivered both of her children, told her to simply leave it alone. As long as I can function and am not denying the world any earth-shaking news, it is better left alone. He also knows me to be a sane, capable, credible person. And here we go to another problem. Having seen a saucer, I feel I must defend my credibility. Even my doctor, while proclaiming my virtues, had to ask if I had seen any other saucers. The inference being that 1 saucer sighting is permissible, 2 a no-no. So she had this experience and she went to this doctor because she knew that there was something missing there. The way she behaved, the stuff with the phone, the whole thing, there was just parts of her memory that she could not get back, she couldn't recall. And she had sought out this doctor who she was hoping would be able to help her possibly remember what happened, but he had other ideas. He just immediately assumed that she had some kind of trauma, something that happened in her past that she was repressing. It had nothing to do with UFOs. And she was telling him over and over, like, I saw a UFO. There's parts of it that I can't remember. I'd like to remember it. But this guy just kept focusing on this past that he had created, this doctor had created, and he was certain that she was hiding some kind of trauma. And eventually it just kind of fell apart.